Hey, it's David. Let's look at the Deutsch Connectors. Since I'm taking the bike apart and I've got the wiring loom out, one of the things I need to do is to take the headlamp bucket off the wiring loom. So to do that, we need to actually have a look at the Deutsch Connectors, and they are a sort of an interesting subject because they are a common electrical plug that Harley uses, and it's a good waterproof plug. It's really easy to take apart and put back together, quite unlike any of the other plugs you tend to find on bikes. So here's the headlamp loom. Now what I've done is I've got 3 plugs here, and I've made a note of all of the wiring into these plugs because they aren't going to come out, having had another look, they aren't going to come out of this tiny little hole. I'm simply not going to get these plugs out of there. Now one of the things I do like about Harley is they do like using these Deutsch plugs, and these Deutsch plugs are very good waterproof plugs, which keep, this bike's 20 years old, and the inside of those pins look like new, look like they've just come out of the factory. Now that's really good. Whereas your sort of typical AMP type connectors, the connectors are corroded and so forth because they aren't just there. Well, there's a comparison. There's an AMP connector you probably can't see, but down inside there, those connectors are all corroded and such. So as I say, I do like the Deutsch. The one downside I think to using the Deutsch is that one of the upsides is you can take them apart and put them back together, which is really good. One of the downsides is if you need to alter the wiring and need to run a new wire into here or repair a wire that's putting a new connector on here, then the tools to do so are quite expensive. But the tools to put AMP connectors on are reasonably expensive as well. But Deutsch probably a little bit more because they're a bit different. I think you need a specialist Deutsch tool. So anyway, as I say, what I've done is I've gone through and I've marked up which wires go into which hole because they are numbered on the back, and I've drawn a little diagram for my headlight so I know which ones go where. So now all I need to do is to pull these apart. Down inside this connector you've got that orange locking wedge. So what you need to do is you need to get in there. A special tool would be lovely to have, but you can just get in there with a screwdriver and sort of lever it out. Let me show you how that works. There are some holes down either side that you can just get a tip of a screwdriver into, and if you can just pull it on here, give it a few attempts just to get a grip of it. There we go. Right, it's called a locking wedge because that's exactly what it is, and that holds all the contacts in place. So with that out the way, what that wedge holds in place, probably can't really see it too well on here. Just down here there's a little grey piece of plastic. Well, it's grey because this connector is grey. So if I take this connector, which happens to be connector 1, and I just pull that back, that wedge back, I can now pull this out. Now you notice here it's trying to pull the waterproof cover out, so we'll just keep that out of the way, and there we go. Now you see what I mean about that pin. That pin looks like it's just come out of the factory, and this bike is 20 years old. Okay, it is protected in the headlight bucket, so perhaps a little bit of an unfair comparison, but then again, so are these connectors in the AMP, and you probably can't tell, but these are corroded. This is brand new. So that's all we need to do, is take hold of our connectors. If this waterproof seal comes out the back, just push it back in. It's no big deal. Let's say, so just with a small screwdriver, just pull that little lever a little tab down, not too far because you don't want to break it. You don't have to buy a new connector because they are quite expensive, but you can buy them, so you know that's no big deal. So pull that out of the way and just wiggle your connectors out. As I say, don't worry about the seal, just don't want to damage it. As I say, if that comes out, it's no big deal. Just don't want to keep it nice and pliable. As I say, it's just to make sure it goes back in and it's undamaged. Now, what I would tend to do is I'll now pop the locking wedge back in. Again, there's a special tool for removing and inserting, but it's not rocket science. Just get it lined up. And give it a click back in place. I'll now put that back on the other end of the plug in the wiring loom, and that's out of the way. And do the same for this one. And with the headlight ones, these are the normal sort of headlight ones. I think these are actually AMP. They're just held on by little tabs. If you work your way around the plug, you'll be able to see them all. There are 3 in this case. Get them all unhooked. That will hinge back, and then these will come out. There's normally a little tab holding them in. Now, it can take a little bit of fiddling to figure out how that tab is locking this in place, and it will vary depending on which plugs they are, but a little bit of fiddling and it normally resolves itself. Right, in this case there are 2 little plastic tabs just here and here, which sit down on top of the connector, and it's just a question of getting them both unclipped at the same time so you can pull it out. So if we look here, those little clips just sit on top of these 2 raised lugs here, and once they're pressed down, if you can apply a little pressure as you pull this up, and we don't need to move the yellow because that's one of our pins there. So that's the 3 plugs removed, and that means that we can remove the harness from the headlight shell. Right, now you may remember that I had a lot of trouble getting this connector apart. This is also another Deutsch connector. it's the one that lives under the engine, and the regulator, one of the wires from the regulator goes in here. Now the way it came apart, as we saw with those Deutsch pins, it was actually the Deutsch pin itself, the connector, that pulled out with its rubber seal instead of the connector coming apart. So the pin came out, which it shouldn't do, and obviously that's not good for the connector. Now I've had to get this in the vise. Now you might remember I was trying to force it apart, and it turns out what happened is this faces forward, and under here, under the clip, there were tiny little stones and bits of grit, which meant that when you press this down, it wouldn't go down, it wouldn't release. Now that I can press this down, the connector comes apart as it should do. So you can see inside there is, if you can see, there's a Deutsch connector with a little rubber seal and so forth. So this all works perfectly now. So hopefully I can get that pin back in there and all will be good. But as I say, so under here, right up under here, there were tiny little bits of stone and grit that was stopping this going down, because there are two little tabs here. They're angled, so they slide. As you push it in, it pushes down and it clips in, but once it's clipped back up, that stops it from coming out. So it wouldn't press down. Even though I was pressing this down, what was happening was the dirt and bits of grit were keeping this end up. So all that was happening was the lever was bending and nothing was happening. Now I've got those cleaned out. That comes in and out just like it should. As I say, hopefully that pin will go back in and all will be well. Otherwise I'll need to buy a new one of these. I thought that, if you can see here, this plastic here is melted because this lives right by the exhaust. So I'd come to the conclusion that this had also welded itself together somehow because of the heat from the exhaust, but wasn't that at all. So as I say, so that now comes apart. Still a little bit sticky, could do a little bit more cleaning up, but there we go. Another Deutsch connector, that one for the regulator. So this is the other end of the Deutsch connector. As you can see, that's the regulator. This pin just pulls apart. So let's just see if we can get this back in there. So I'm not sure how these clip in. Oh, there we go, there. So that's clipped in. So now if I push the rubber seal back in, there. So that now should be fine. I'm going to just have to hope that actually works. We'll find out in due course. But there we go. So one more Deutsch connector. This one a single. These are quite unusual, these single ones, and designed for quite harsh environments. But clearly not that well designed. Or perhaps what Harley should have done is to turn the plug around so that dirt and grit from the road and the front wheel didn't find its way up inside the clip there. So that's the regulator now repaired, hopefully. Does need a bit of cleaning up, but that in due course. So now I can roll this up and put it away so we can move on. Now, just before I wrap back up on this, some of you might be wondering, okay, that's great, so now you've taken the plugs apart, how do you put them back together? Well, it's really, really easy. So this is, as you can see, one of the handlebar controls, and I just put that back together. So we pull that apart, so I put that to one side. So I need to pull the locking wedge out. There we go. Now you refer to your wiring diagram. So this is plug number 1. It's marked here. It goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Perhaps if I did it with this. So it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That tends to catch me out because I tend to think it'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It doesn't. It goes this way around. So you look at your wiring diagram and you go, okay, now plug number 1 is, let's say, the grey one. It's not, okay? I'm just using this as an example. So with this seal firmly in place, we push this in. Until it clicks in place, and that's it. And then I take, okay, what's number 2? In this case, we're going to say it's this one. I just push it through, and it clicks in place. And then I go, ah, damn, I've gone the wrong way round. Well, no big deal. If I apply a little tension to both the back of them, I just pull out. Just wiggle them out. The seal isn't numbered, it just goes, doesn't matter. As long as it says Deutsch on the outside. In fact, it says Deutsch on both sides, so it doesn't actually matter which way around it goes. So then I go, okay, right, so it should have been the grey in this one. You just push it in. Once you've got them in there, let's just push these back in. You put the locking pin. Now, one thing I will say, if you're going to leave empty holes, that's obviously going to let the water in. Deutsch do little white plugs. If I can, like on the back here, right? These little white plugs just fill up the gaps to stop the water coming in. So if you're going to leave a Deutsch plug with gaps on the end, you need to put those little white plugs in. Once they're in, and they're just dummy pins. We drop the locking wedge back in, press it till it clicks. Now the plug is ready to go. So put it back together. Fully waterproof plug. Well, that's not, because it's got holes. But there you go. So that's all you need to do to put the Deutsch plugs back together. Right, there you go. So the Deutsch plugs, great plugs, easy to take apart and easy to rewire, change the settings. As I say, if you do want to add wires, crimp new connections, then things start getting a bit more expensive because you've got to buy the crimping tools. To be honest, I'm considering buying the Deutsch crimping tools, or the slightly cheaper copies of, so that I can actually use Deutsch connectors on future builds, and possibly even on putting the Harley back together, because they are a great plug and really easy to work with. Plus, as you saw, they're really waterproof. So, well, so long as you don't get bits of grit under little clips that allow you to take them apart. Anyway, so great plug, highly recommended. It's one of the things I love about Harley using. Anyway, thanks very much for watching, and I'll catch you guys again soon.